Hi, I'm Leia, and welcome to our lesson today. We are 5 in our team. It's me, Caitlin, Jesse, Ashley, and Michaela, and we will be presenting a lesson for the CCQ program about responsibility and communication. Let's see what we got.
Hi, Dr. Yarlarome. It's Jessie. This lesson is called Growing into Responsibility. It is designed for a grade 6 culture and citizenship in Quebec class, and it takes roughly 60 to 75 minutes with some follow-up homework that students can complete at home or at school. At this age, students are preparing for more independence as they get ready for high school, so they benefit from clearer structure and guidance, especially when it comes to respectful communication and understanding classroom norms. They also need support in navigating relationships with authority figures and opportunities to develop ethical reasoning and self-awareness, which fits well with the goals of the Culture and Citizenship in Quebec program. This lesson fits into a larger unit called Becoming Responsible Citizens. Respect within dialogue starts in grade 6. The whole unit is about helping students learn how communities work, how everyone plays a role in a shared space, and how respectful communication supports learning and citizenship. Throughout the unit, students look at ideas like identity, authority, respect, shared norms, ethical decision-making, and how we build relationships with others. This particular lesson would come third in the sequence, following an introduction to roles and responsibilities in the classroom. Overall, the unit would run for about 6 to 8 lessons, giving you an idea of how large this unit would be.
Hi, I'm Ashley, and I'm going to be discussing slides 4 and 5 of this presentation. So, why choose this lesson? Well, by the time students reach grade 6, they're becoming of age where they're beginning to discover who they are and starting to make decisions for themselves. Even though this is a time for a new chapter in their lives, students are often left feeling anxious and uncertain about this future, especially for high school. This lesson was designed to help students navigate through this confusion and provide them with a sense of ease through gaining answers to questions they may have about high school life and what is expected of them. Since this transition to high school and adult life in general is typically high stress for students, most want to just try to fit in the best they can, and usually that means they can be influenced by their peers, being either positively or negatively. So with that, this lesson is meant to help calm those nerves, help set those expectations high school will have, and make sure students are personally well prepared to help avoid falling into the trap of being influenced negatively. Also, to add on to this, doing a project like this allows for students to get insider information on what the life of a high schooler is really like, and that they understand what will be asked of them in terms of higher expectation, and that it's not anything like elementary school anymore. In this next slide over here, so the learning intentions are listed, as you can see. So these learning intentions are written in the student's voice, which is very important so that it sounds like it's coming from them. And so this means that it is an attainable goal for them to reach, so they can see themselves reaching this goal. So these intentions were designed with the thought process that by the end of this unit or lesson, students will be able to confidently say that they have reached these goals. These intentions are meant to target the benefits of learning how to properly conduct an interview, while at the same time having students learn how they can take this information they have learned from their interviews and apply it into their real lives. That is the end goal for these intentions.
Hi, I'm Katie, and now we'll be going over the program alignment, so really how this lesson relates to the competencies. So with regards to CCQ, we said observation of cultural realities. Students will be asking themselves comprehension questions. They will be making observations and choosing whether they are relevant or not. They will be expressing themselves through dialogue and communicating with others through dialogue. and expressing their own understanding, especially in the reflection and in the exit ticket. Going on to the ELA competencies, students will be understanding the conventions of written language, so using the linguistic structures and the mechanics, spelling, capitalization, etc. So really the basics. They will then follow the cross-curricular competencies. So we said they will be using information, using their critical judgment, communicating appropriately with others, especially that one, because that is the goal by having them practice their questions to ask their interviewees. Then moving on to the next slide, we have the lesson structure. So the teacher would start by sharing the opening to the students. They would then go into building questions. Students would practice their questions with their peers. They would then go on to doing the actual interview on their own time. Then coming back in another class, they would be writing the reflection, and then ending this whole lesson would be an exit ticket, sharing their experience. So the way the teacher would share the opening would be by presenting the students with, today you will become interviewers, so you will learn from people who have already experienced what respectful communication and responsibility looks like in high school or when you become an adult. So as a class, they would have a discussion inspired by questions that the teacher might ask that say, how does storytelling shape relationships with others? How do we learn from others? And so on. The teacher would really have to set foundations and expectations, especially since when the students are doing the interviews, it's not in class time, so the teacher's not there to kind of surveil and guide the students. They really have to make sure the expectations are set before. So the teacher would ask students what makes a respectful interview, and the expected answers would be tone, active listening, not interrupting the speaker, asking clear questions, and respecting personal boundaries. So while the students are hopefully shouting these answers out or either raising their hands, the teacher would be writing them down on the board for physical representation.
So to follow up with the opening and the setting of expectation that Caitlin just talked about, it's important to set the expectations with the students, especially in grade 6, because that's when they start to feel like they have kind of a sense of responsibility and they feel like they're implicated in how we will do this lesson. So once the expectations are set, the teacher would provide some example questions of what we are expecting of them. So questions like, what advice would you give me as a grade 6 student about responsibility? What was your biggest communication challenge you faced in high school? Questions like this that could be written on the board so students could refer to them throughout their brainstorm. So what we would want them to do as of now would be a brainstorming of questions. They would be placed in groups of pairs so they could have a good brainstorm of questions. They could have more than what they're expected to do. And so like this, when they're going to sit down and write their questions, they're going to have a good load of questions to look out for. So after they're doing their brainstorm, the students would go back to their desk and they would be expected to write 5 to 7 questions. They would have a sheet that would be already set up for them, an interview question sheet, and they would have some space to write their questions and a blank space where they would write some notes about the answer that they're going to get for that specific question. The teacher would check around for clarity of the questions and the tone of the questions too. The teacher could give advice at that point. So when the teacher walk around and see what the students are writing, the teacher would be in a good place to give advice before they go for the interview. Once all of the students would have their questions written down, we would do a practice round. So students would be placed in pairs or groups of 3s, and they would practice their interview. So what we would tell the students as a teacher would be our expectations about what we want the practice to look like. So we would want the students to practice being the interviewer and the interviewee. And when they are in the role of the interviewee, it'd be important to give the feedback of what they think of the question. Does your question make sense? Is it very clear? Is there a good tone? So that would be the expectations of when they're doing a practice. We would let the students work on their own, but as a teacher, we would walk around and see how it's going and if they are really giving feedback, because that's the important part, right? Not just the teacher feedback, but also the peer feedback. After doing the practice with their peers, that would build their confidence a little bit more so they would be ready for the interview. As a teacher, we would give them two options. So they would have the options to go home with their homework and interview a family member. It could be an adult, it could be an older sibling, it could be someone in relation to them, as long as they already went through high school or are going through high school right now. If the students choose that option, they bring their homework in their homework binder, and they would have the night of and the next night to do this interview. So they would have 2 nights to do it, but when they come back with their interview, the notes already have to be taken down of what the answers were. The second option could also be interviewing a staff member from the school. We give that option because we take in consideration that not everybody has the place at home to do something like that. Not everybody has the place at home to just do homework. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity for some of the students to just do it at school and get it done with. So what we would do is we would ask the students to choose one of the staff member, and we would take responsibility for building the time to do it. So some staff member have planning period, so we would ask them if it'd be okay, and we would allow 15 to 20 minutes for the students to interview them and write their answers. I think some students would choose. Since some of the students would have 2 nights to do this interview, the rest of the lesson plan would take place 2 days after. So 2 days after, we would have a reflection. The students would have their answer sheet with their interview questions with them, and we would give them a self-reflection worksheet. On that self-reflection worksheet, some questions would be, who did you interview? What did you learn about responsibility? What communication strategies seemed important? What surprised you? And how will this help you next year in high school? They would have to do this on their own, answer the questions very carefully, take the time to think about them. And then after they will be all done with their self-reflection worksheet, we would do a talking circle. That would be something that we would do often in our grade 6 class. So they would know how it works. They would know the rules. They would know the norms of the talking circle. What we would do in that talking circle is let the students share one key thing about their reflection worksheet. So they can share something that they got surprised with. They can share something that they're going to bring to high school. They could also pass. In our class, it would be allowed to pass in the talking circle. So that's a place where they could share. And we think that that would help the other students too to understand, oh, I didn't see it this way. That's new to me. So they could reflect to doing the talking circle. We would also have an exit ticket for them. So we, as a class in our ELA class, in our English Language Arts class, we would have a writing journal. We would use that in this lesson too. So our exit ticket would be, one piece of advice I want to remember for high school is, and the students would have to write at least a paragraph about this little prompt. That would be their exit ticket from this lesson.
So having students come up with interview questions and choosing an interviewee reminds me of how I did a project like this when I was in high school. So for my project, my community was creating a book filled with interviews of elders throughout the valley to celebrate my town's anniversary, and I needed to come up with interview questions, and I was assigned to an elderly lady where I went to her home and conducted an interview, and I took this information that I got from the interview and I used it to do a write-up after. So what I'm trying to get at is I have experienced what it's like as a student to conduct an interview, and I found it very beneficial. I gained a deeper understanding of how deep, truly deep, a conversation can go when you ask the right questions. I learned a lot of stories about the valley I'd never heard of before, and I learned much more. I learned a lot from this experience, and I still think about that lady to this day. So when these grade 6 students interview someone, it can definitely help them learn something for their future and hopefully apply it to their own lives.
So let's get started on the theoretical framework.
For our lesson, we grounded on teaching students respectful communication and responsibility. And some scholars that supported our approach are Dufour, Dewey, Curran, and Garnier. So let's start with Dufour. She supported our lesson by stating that classrooms are shared spaces, and that these shared spaces are shaped by the relationships of those within the classroom, and they're also shaped by how people within that classroom communicate with each other. Dufour also states that communication is not neutral. Communication impacts how one feels and how much people feel like they belong within that shared space. Our lesson connects to Dufour's work because we're teaching students that their behavior and how they communicate can influence their shared classroom within their future high school. Dewey also supported our lesson. So Dewey stated that learning happens. So let's continue with the theoretical framework. When we developed our lesson, we thought of the students of the grade 6 age who tend to try to push or test their limits, which is one of the main reasons why we thought it was important to teach students how to communicate appropriately and teach them responsibility. After doing research, we found that research did show that early teens commonly have stronger emotional reactions and tend to test their boundaries as a normal part of developing their identity. Kerwin, Mendler, and Mendler state that most oftentimes, students' behavior stems from their internal fight or flight response, which can be shown as arguments, temper tantrums, name-calling, and passive-aggressive behavior. Therefore, our lesson is important as it teaches students how to communicate appropriately and help them express themselves respectfully. Garnier states that rebellion is a typical part of development. Teenagers often do not follow rules to see how far they can go, and oftentimes they push back against adults as a way to express their increasing independence, which is why it's important to teach them how to communicate respectfully and how to appropriately express their independence. All three of our authors reinforce the importance of providing grade 6 students with structured opportunities to practice respectful and ethical communication. As grade 6 students are going into high school, which is a more demanding and less personalized environment, it is important that they learn how to have respect for authority and understand that their behavior affects the shared space around them.
As a reflection on our project, we were wondering what could we do in our presentation that would show that we reflected on it. What we came up with was maybe give a piece of advice to grade 6 students going into high school. To do this process, we had to reflect on our own experience of the transition between grade 6 and high school. So for myself, Leia, a piece of advice I would give to grade 6 students, or even to myself in grade 6, would be that it's okay to have opinions. It's okay to be in disagreement with something, but there's a way to say things, and it's very important to understand that you have to say those things very respectfully. I'm someone that always had very strong opinions, and I always stood by my opinions and stood my grounds. I think it would have been a really good piece of advice when I was in grade 6 to know that when you disagree, there's a way to disagree with people, and not necessarily to be loved by others, but to understand that others also have feelings, and that sometimes you can come off as harsh. And so I think it would be a very good advice for our grade 6 students to understand that it's okay to disagree, but it's also okay to understand that there's a way to say things. I would also say, if you love something, go for it. It's okay to be judged by others, and sometimes you have to just think about something else. As someone that was very implicated in high school, I was the president of my high school for 3 years, and some people would think that why would you do that? People would judge you. I would tell grade 6 students, if you want to do it. It's worth it. Because looking back on my high school journey, I wouldn't change a thing. I loved it. So that's why I would say to grade 6 students, follow what you want to do, follow your opinions, stand by them. It's okay to disagree, and it's okay to hear what others have to say too. It's okay to change your opinions after you heard something from someone else. So that's what I would say to grade 6 students. Thank you so much for this semester. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and see you soon.
I have 2 pieces of advice for grade 6 students. that can help them with respectful communication when entering high school. So my first piece of advice for grade 6 students is that you should always listen and think before you speak. It is important that you take the time to listen to someone and think about what they said before you respond. Sometimes responding without listening can lead to frustration and confusion. My second piece of advice for you as grade 6 students is that you can never control what happens in a situation, but you can always control how you respond to it. Conflicts are challenging, but they're also necessary, and learning how to communicate appropriately can help conflicts stay respectful.
As you get ready to move into high school, one of the most important skills you bring with you is learning how to communicate responsibly and respectfully. This means listening to others, even when you disagree, thinking before you speak, and choosing words that show you care about how some people feel. You can do this by being honest, maybe asking questions you're unsure, and speaking in a way that is calm and clear. Thank you.
A piece of advice I'd give to a grade 6 students about responsibility and the transition to high school is to remember that you are responsible for your own learning and what you make of it. And I'd also like to add that getting involved in high school, no matter what it be, a sport, drama, a club, you name it, it will be beneficial to your experience, and I highly recommend that you can get out there and get involved.
So, a piece of advice I would give a grade 6 student entering a high school would just be to not feel influenced by peers around them. It is a time for them to enjoy this new independence and to really figure out for them what, hobbies or activities they love, whether it's sports, whether it's arts. Don't let your friends or teachers or adults in your lives try to convince you of what you like. It is, at the end of the day, it's really you that will know.